Captain Larry Bell with Texas Fishing Tips. This is your weekly fishing report. Cedar Bayou back into Mesquite Bay, this whole back shoreline. You know, we've had a lot of water that's been pushed in here from the hurricane that pushed in on Florida this past week, and now that our waters have dropped out back to normal levels, something you must take into consideration. So if you had the opportunity to fish those higher tides, I'm sure that you got into some back lakes, or at least I hope you did, to take advantage of some of those situations and catching some fish in some areas that you're probably not normally able to do or be able to get to. So what that does now is you go back to fishing normal, back to your normal water depths and edges and lines and stuff that you were fishing prior to all the higher water being in here. So back down here around Cedar and the mouth of Cedar, this whole back shoreline all the way up to Bray Cove, nice little cut through. It's got a little back lake area that's back in there. You can fish that. Been some fish that's been holding it in there. Been some few redfish scattered in there. Some lower slot. Some plenty of undersized trout have been back in this area as well. And that little deeper flat that's off that point headed into Bray Cove, or where the old Texas Parks and Wildlife building is. If you fished back in there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Two things, or really three baits that we've been throwing primarily for this particular area has been the down south twisted T in the original and the burner size. That's been consistent all summer long. I haven't backed off of that. It's been there. You can sprinkle in the white ice or the purple rain as well in the burner shad, but the original twisted T in both the original and the burner have been the most productive in this area in size wise. So it also has the knock and tail in both the greenback, heavy metal, and now the watermelon red. It's a 3 1/4 inch bait, and we're headed toward a full moon. So that is something that you need to take in consideration, that you need to downsize your bait profile, because fish, again, they are predominantly night feeders. So your best opportunities as we head into this is coming up here in that 10-day stretch for that full moon phase is here pretty quick in the next few days. So again, make sure that you downsize your bait size or the profile of it. The watermelon red's a 3 1/4 inch bait, and that knock and tail lure, it's a really great bait. Again, we're only throwing 16th ounce 2-aught jig heads. That's all we've been throwing all summer long, and they've been working well. It's allowing us to really fish the shallower waters and just a tad bit deeper water as well with great success. So if you're not doing that, you may want to put that in your arsenal and consider that if you're having issues catching some fish in some of these areas. If you're using an 1/8 ounce jig head or 3/16, the bait's going to drop too fast into the grass and you're going to get constantly hung up. That's why the 16th ounce is important, because you need something a little slower drop. It allows that bait to glide through the water column so you can control it and keep it out of the grass, and you can catch more fish that way. So just remember that when you're fishing these thigh to knee-deep water areas now that this water has begun to drop out. As we come back around into Bray Cove, the back shoreline, all back in here, all the way around to the mouth, the back lakes, back to Little Brundit, big back lakes that are back there. Topwater baits have been good back in these areas. We've located some fish with those and had a lot of good early morning bites with those, but that's kind of tapered a little bit. So if you're a topwater junkie, keep chunking it. The only thing we're having to contend with is a lot of floating grass, so it really gets hung up pretty bad. So we've flipped over to just throwing the jig heads, 16th ounce again, back in Little Brundit, back in there, these mouths of these back lakes that dump out here to Bray. You've got a nice little edge out there that you can walk that. Great bottom to fish. The big back lake that's up in here as well, it's been holding some redfish and some trout. Again, those baits have been the main thing that we've been throwing. Twisted T, knock and tail, in both the flavors that I mentioned earlier, have been really good and very productive back down in this area here. Again, majors and minors have been a key point of emphasis. Outside of obviously having bait working in the area that you want to fish, you got to make sure that you have a bait source or a food source in that area. But again, working these areas around the majors and minors have been most productive. Anything outside of that, it tapers really fast. So you really, you go back to getting your reactionary strikes instead of your feeding strikes. So just keep that in mind when you're working any of these areas. It applies everywhere, but the thing about it is it's been very productive. So incorporate that into your fishing day. Pay attention to what your tides are doing, because they are definitely different now since the water has dropped out. Work these areas with those baits, and you'll be very, very productive with your fishing. St. Joe shoreline, down just from Paul's Mott area all the way down past this area here, all the way as you head toward Allen's Bight. All this area in here, again, has open areas that go into these back lakes. Fish these mouths, fish these guts, fish these edges. Great amount of grass, tremendous potholes that are all, lots of opportunities up and down the shoreline. You know, guys, in the artificial world, we're fixing to get better and better, and it's just going to be great for the world of artificial because we're heading into our cooler months. Probably won't really get cold until December. But we'll probably have some opportunities where it'll get chilly. And what happens is those fish, you know, they start to migrate and move and get to different areas. But the artificial game gets bigger and bigger and bigger because a lot of this bait that's in here right now, just like it did in the springtime, is going to migrate back south, back down to the warmer waters of Mexico and South Texas, even further, you know, Laredo, Rio Grande area, down in Brownsville and that area, and even further. So a lot of this fish is going to, bait fish is really going to run out of here. So there won't be a whole lot of bait left other than just your regular mullet, a few pigs here and there, but artificial gets better and better. So all these areas that you've got drops and edges and grass lines, these fish are going to hold over that. So you're going to want to work these areas. Again, the back lake mouths that dump out into on the St. Joe shoreline, you can walk up into those. Like I say, we've had a lot of water into our system, so it's allowed you to get into some areas. If you took advantage of that for a few days, that you could get back to some areas and find some fish in these back lakes and be successful, throwing artificial, throwing a topwater, throwing a plastic, throwing a double D, whatever, suspended baits, get back in these areas. But again, now that we're back to normal levels, you know, go back to your plastics, topwaters again, but, you know, work on the inside of these mouths, work on the outside. Come back down into here. If you fished Allen Bights, it's a pretty popular place. A lot of people fish this and like to go up there, and they have pretty good success on days. Great area to fish, man. Locate, again, main things that you want to look for is bait working in your area, your structure. These fish are going to start migrating or moving around or transitioning as our water temps have dropped, because we had a little cool front in here, because that's kind of saved us from that hurricane that was headed toward Florida, was headed toward us till that thing pushed in and made it turn. So what's going to happen is that cooler air in here has dropped our water temps to, you know, we're in the upper 70s now, 77, 78, even 74 in some spots. Something to consider is those fish are going to start understanding that and figuring that out, and they're going to start moving to warmer water areas. But the structure is totally different that you would typically find them on during the summer, spring, early fall. Now they're going to start moving around to some different areas, so that's something that you need to keep in mind as well. That these fish will migrate or move, or as they move into a transition phase. As the cooler weather and cooler months are ahead of us, those fish are not going to be found in the same places. So always consider that as different times of the year, fish are going to move. Again, best baits and fish that we've been locating, redfish back in here primarily. We've caught a few dink trouts, not a tremendous amount of them, but they're there. You know, you come across them, but it's been okay. But we've been primarily looking for redfish back in these areas here, and had good success on the knock and tail watermelon red, down south lure twisted T original size. When you don't have a lot of floating bait, of course, this north wind has pushed, floating grass. A lot of this north wind has pushed grass back up into our shoreline, so it's kind of made it difficult to throw the topwater bait. But if you find clean water where you don't have a lot of floating grass, throw the topwater bait back in here now, especially now that the water levels have dropped back to somewhat normal levels. And you'll have a decent amount of success with that. Early morning bite, once the sun is starting to get up to around 9-ish, 10-ish, you can start to tell that the bite for topwater just becomes more slaps and swirls and not so much takes. But if you like to stick with it because it's a great action bait. You get a lot of activity with it. And when you do get those explosions where that redfish takes it, it's a lot of fun. So if that's what you love to do, then do it. Keep sticking with it. Again, 16th ounce jig heads. Majors and minors, work your bait levels back in here. Pay attention to your tides, because you can get yourself in trouble, because it gets pretty skinny back here in the Allen Bight area from time to time. So you just want to keep that in mind as you begin to work and fish around these areas. Over on Swan Lake down here, Copano, fish this area a lot. Get back up here in the lake. Again, with the extra water we've had in here, so it's been very productive area back in here. These back lakes have been holding some redfish down this back shoreline, which they'll still be hanging in there. Topwater bait was really good back in here for a little bit until the floating grass got us. So, again, back to the plastics and throwing plastics back in here. 16th ounce jig heads, the down south twisted tea, knock and tail in watermelon red, heavy metal. Those two colors primarily have been very good back in this area here. Water's been semi-clear, so you can really work those baits through that pretty easily. If you can get your top water in here and still work it, you should be just fine. Again, lots of activity, lots of action back in here, a lot of bait working back in there. It's worked this whole back shoreline. You get over here to the back side of these islands, it gets super soft. So it's a great area for the wintertime. Just keep that in mind when you get over that heavy mud and stuff. That's going to be an area that you're going to want to emphasize and fish, that particular area. Out in the middle of it's been pretty good. Fish has been kind of scattered a little bit here and there, but we're still working them, still finding them. Work all this shoreline coming down this way, coming all the way back to the mouth as you get to the big flat that's back up over around the Grass Island area. You can get on the outside of here. We found some trout on the drop out here. Again, throwing down south, throwing knocking tails, throwing a little bit of double D. Again, the floating grass is kind of get you hung up, but if you can work it long enough, you can have success with that. But those baits have been working. Another thing, the soft dine has been pretty good. You can work that bait back in these areas off the drop or off the edges. Again, keep in mind, you've got a full moon that's coming. We'll be heading out of these wild card days into the 10 days that lead up to the full moon. So your early morning bites will continue to get better. Your late morning bites will continue to get better. Your middle of the day bites will be difficult. If that's when you want to fish, you can fish it, and you'll find some fish. You'll catch some fish, but it will be a grind. It will be very difficult during the middle of the day. So if you can get your fishing time around early morning, and I'm saying from sunrise till 10, 11 o'clock, and then from in the evening time from probably 5 till sunset. That will be your best opportunities to catch the most of your fish throughout in those time frames as we get closer to the full moon. Not so much right at the moment, but give it a few days and you can work those areas still. You can find fish working up and down these areas, and it'll all be good. I mean, look for your bait. Look for your structure that's in here, your grass, your potholes, your edges. All that fish is where they've been hanging out. Again, the majors and minors have been the most productive time frame for us. Those baits that I mentioned have been most productive for me over the past 3 to 4 weeks. The Twisted Tea's been money for me all summer long, so you can't really go wrong with that one. So just keep chunking it, and if you want to incorporate the knock and tail lure in there, it's a great choice. Terrific bait, catches fish. It's very easy to work, so keep that in mind. As if that is something you do not have in your box, you might want to pick you a package of those up as soon as you can, because it is a really productive bait. And again, as we get into our cooler months, as we head toward the end of October, even though it's just started, November's just around the corner. Golly, just artificial time. It's just really, really good during this time frame. So keep those things in mind as you fish these areas, and you will locate and find your fish. Thanks for watching. I'm Captain Larry Bell.